same time, you get bored of doing the same thing over and over and over again. And I realized that as I did the effect, each time I did it slightly different. This hand, that hand, my patter, my presentation, how I presented the whole moment. And I realized that after like maybe a year, I didn't have a thumb tip trick. I had a thumb tip routine. And that's not because I was focusing on creating the routine. Excuse me for 1 second. Congestion. It's not because I had to focus on creating a routine. It was because my own growth as a magician and a performer kind of fostered the trick into something that was more me. And I must say, I'm really happy with the routine the way I have it now. It's like it lasts maybe like 5 to 7 minutes, depending again how fast I talk. But it's a really good, in my opinion, a good routine that actually gets everybody close together. It gets them interacting with you, and it actually teaches them something that they might not have known themselves. Because essentially, what I do is I got everyone has this little silk hanky. I vanished the hanky, and I talk a lot during this time because I have to establish something later on. And I always give them the choice, this hand or this hand. What hand is it coming back in? And, regardless of what they say, it always comes back in that hand. But then I start explaining not how the trick works, but why the trick works. And as I'm talking to them, and as actually you probably even notice it yourself, and it's said in magic a lot. When you talk to people, people look at you, and that's a really good way to kind of enforce that the magician is using them against them. And that's the whole idea of my routine. I'm using them against them. Like their own psychology, their own intellect is being used against them. So I point out that while I'm talking, they're looking up here and not where the magic's happening. So and 9 times out of 10, most people will, okay, well I'm going to focus here. And then you have to point out that as you continue talking and they're focusing back on your hand or whatever, it's really hard to resist the temptation to look away. And I always interject a little humor. If it's a family, if there's kids, I always say, I'm sure someone said, look at me while I'm talking too. And more than once, I got hit too, It's like child beater. But it's the whole culmination of me presenting magic in a way that makes it understandable to them, but still magical, because they don't know how the trick, they know why the trick works, but they don't know how the trick works. And the two are, maybe similar, they're not quite the same. And then from there, it's ooh. And then I'll actually move on to doing something like salt or sugar, and vanishing, from one hand out from the other hand. And that's just when I wrap it up, because the silk is one thing, but the sugar, the crystals, the mess that stuff makes is a completely different thing as well. I've even gone as far as doing water, but that's actually a little messy, so I stuck with the salt just because I didn't want to get too messy at the table. But that whole presentation from start to finish was not my goal when I first started doing the thumb stuff. It was like, oh, it goes up here and around here, and I got a transport system in my sleeves, woohoo! And as I performed over and over and over and over again, I realized I wasn't satisfied with some of the things I was saying, not only because they seemed contrived, but they seemed silly. I've always been, for me, magic, yes, can be magical, but the key word in magic tricks is magic tricks. They're tricks. I'm not going to insult anybody's intelligence and say, I'm a magician, ooh, it's magic, the gods are smiling on me. I'm not going to be that guy, because I'm not that guy. I'm the realist. I'm a realistic person. I'm not the kind of person to take my audience or my spectators for fools. And I'll even stress that these are magic tricks. Not because I'm trying to take away from the whole moment, but I'm trying to make again, the important thing is you have to judge your people. You have to be able to judge who you're performing for. But I don't like having my spectators feel like they're being made a fool of. And just yesterday, I was actually performing, there's a bunch of people, like a clothing company, I think it was Garage. They had a party for their managers and stuff like that. And I'm working in the restaurant, and as I'm working, I noticed one girl to my left was paying a bit more attention than most people were. Way more attention than I thought she actually should have been. And you could tell by the way she's interacting, how she wanted to know how things were done. She's, peeking when she shouldn't peek. And it's been my experience that people, those kind of people especially, either A, don't like being fooled, or B, have been schooled in the sciences. And when I say school, like a physical science or biology, like these are people who need to know, not because they want to know how the trick is done. They just need to know. They don't like not knowing. And I pegged it right on. I go, you studied in the sciences, and she said, yeah. How'd you know? And I explained to her like my psychology, my way, my interpretation of her actions was bang on, and I've never been wrong. I can always tell people who've been schooled in the sciences. I can pick them out after doing one or two tricks. I know exactly who they are. So, in an effort to not, and I learned this early on, in an effort not to ostracize those people or to make them feel stupid, I learned to stress the fact that it's a magic trick. That, you went to school for 10, 12 years to learn what you know, to do it well. I've been learning this for 10 to 12 years, and I do it well. It's not the fact that I'm making a fool of you. That it's the fact that I am actually schooled in doing things that are invisible. And a lot of people accept that. So back to the routining anyways. So it's the routining isn't necessarily something that happens instantly. It's more of an evolutionary process. You might take an ambitious card that, like, for instance, Crash 2. You might take that complete routine, start performing it, and then, over time, over and over and over and over again, if you're the kind of person that's interested in growth, you might actually start to change that into something that is more your style, more your personality. It heads in the direction that you want to go. It might even actually, tie into something that you do with another, like for me, cardboard. So there's no easy answer for routining. Essentially, is the answer to this 16-minute video. It's one of those things that basically is trial and error and growth. You're not going to be 6 months into magic and coming up with all sorts of great routines. It's just not going to happen. You don't have the background. You don't have the way of thinking yet, and more importantly, you don't have the experience. And for me, experience. In my case, especially, experience was the thing that brought it all together. The fact that I was doing these things over and over and over again allowed me to subconsciously and consciously choose the things to say, to do, and to do after in order to create something that was actually, for me, workable. So, in a nutshell, again, I'll say this again, it's not something that happens easily. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of thought, subconsciously or consciously, to get to the point where your trick has turned into a routine. So, and the one issue I will say is if you learn magic from videos, you run the risk of becoming an imitator rather than a performer. And you're still performing, I'll give you that. But you run the risk of, for instance, if you're doing a Bill Malone trick. I recently saw someone do a Bill Malone trick, and it was like watching Bill Malone, but not have it being Bill Malone, and that's the problem. You're gonna and magicians is one thing. If you're doing that for a spectator, they're not gonna know. But at the same time, being like someone stifles your growth to the point where you can't be yourself. So. That's why that's why everybody advocates, especially the more experienced magicians, that's why they advocate book learning. It's because it allows you to be yourself rather than be someone else. You don't have the personality teaching you. It's the effect, only the effect, not the exuberance of the performer or the way he talks or his one-liners, So take a trick that you know, and just do it over and over and over again. And maybe change the order of something, or change what you say. But just focus on that one trick for a while and see what happens from point A to point B, and see if you grow. If you find that you're not growing, then perhaps it's not that trick is not ready for a routine, or perhaps you just don't want to, or you're not ready. So focus on one thing that you like and see what happens with that one. And if it blossoms from there, then great. Move on to something else and see if you can tie them together. But in the end, it's all about how you grow and how you come up with everything. So on that note, I'm approaching my 20-minute time limit. I've wasted so much time today. Wow. Internet, goodbye.